Welcome to the tutorial video for the Levine's Machines drum machine by Iconic Instruments. The Levine's Machines drum machine is the first of the Levine's Machines series, a new collaboration with British multi-award winning producer and engineer Steve Levine. And this particular unit that the Levine's Machines drum machine was based off of has serious pop provenance, being a central part of Steve's career and appearing on so many of his records. Please check out our full-length interview with Steve to hear more about his career, his process, artists he's worked with, and his gear. This software is more than just a virtual instrument though. It's a mixing environment and a sequencer all in one, based on Steve's gear and workflow. Below in the description of this video is a hyperlinked table of contents, so you can jump ahead to whatever topic you want to learn about. So let's get started with the Levine's Machines drum machine by Iconic Instruments. After making your purchase, you will receive an email from us that contains your download links and your serial number. In this first version of the installer, there will be a separate AU-VST installer and then a separate AAX installer. That's both for Mac and PC. As we update, we may be able to get that as a single installer, but for now they're separate. So if you're a Pro Tools user, you're going to want to use the AAX installer. If you're any other DAW, you'll just use the AU-VST installer. So let's first go through the Macintosh installer instructions. Once you download that installer, just find where you've downloaded it, double click on it, and it will start the installation wizard. So when you first double click on the installer, it's going to guide you through with the installation wizard. You're just going to want to continue past the first screen. There's our end user license agreement. Next is where you choose AU, VST, or VST3, or all three that you want to install. Or if you're installing the AAX version, the only option here will be AAX. Just hit continue. It'll warn you how much space you need to install. Just hit install, type in your password, and then the installation begins. This should take just a minute. You'll get this message saying the installer app wants to make changes on your Mac. Just hit allow, and that's it. Then you hit close. Now it's installed on your Mac. The Windows process is almost identical, so let's just take you through that as well. So you will receive an email from us that contains your download links and your serial number. Once you've downloaded the installer, just find where you have it saved. As I said, there are separate installers for AAX and VST. So if you're a Pro Tools user, you're going to want to go to the AAX installer. If you use any other DAW that operates on the VST platform, use the VST installer. So just go to where that's stored on your computer and double click it. That will open the installation wizard. The first thing that will pop up is this dialog box. My screen capture software doesn't record this screen for some reason, so this is just a snapshot. Just hit yes, and then you'll be brought to our end user license agreement. So just click on accept and next. Here's where you can change the location of the installation. I just always go with the default location, so it's on your internal drive. Hit next, and then you'll be prompted to hit install to continue with the installation. And then it starts writing the files to your drive. And then once it's done, just hit finish. Now the next step is authorization. In order to do that, you just have to open your DAW and instantiate the Levine's Machines drum machine, and it will ask you for your serial number. So in this case, I'm just starting Logic on my machine, opening up a virtual instrument track, and then I insert the Levine's Machines drum machine from Iconic Instruments. Now here, you'll notice that there are two options, a stereo option and a multi-output option. Depending on whether you're going to bus out each individual drum to a separate track, then you'd want to use the multi-output option. Otherwise, the stereo option is fine. So just click one of those. It will instantiate the Levine's Machines drum machine, and you'll be presented with this screen. Here is where you enter your serial number from your email, and then hit activate, and it will ping the server and authorize your Levine's Machines drum machine. And authorization is exactly the same for a Windows machine. Just instantiate it in whatever DAW you use, and it should call for the serial number, enter the serial number, activate it, and you're good to go. Now that you have the Levine's Machines drum machine authorized on your machine, let's get to work with it in your DAW. So I'm just in Logic here. We already did this for the authorization process, but let me just show you again. So in our virtual instrument track, click on the instrument pull-down menu and find the Iconic Instruments Levine's Machines drum machine, either stereo or multi-output. I'm going to choose multi-output just so I can show you those features. And the first thing I want to show you is that depending on which size screen you're using, if you're using a laptop or an external monitor, you may want to resize the window. So you have that option here. You can shrink it down to take up less real estate, or if you're on a big screen, you really want to see what's going on, you can expand it. So we'll just kind of land in the middle right about there. Another useful function on the Levine's Machines drum machine is normaling. On any parameter, if you want to normal it or bring it back to its default value, you can just option click it on Mac or control click on PC. Now, in terms of the features, the very first thing I want to draw your attention to is the play stop button. So that's over here in the sequencer tab. There's two tabs. This is the drums and mixer window, and we can tab over here to the sequencer itself. Now, when the play stop button is off, this sequencer is disconnected from your DAW. So if I hit play, the sequencer's running, but it's not triggering any sounds. Whereas if it's on and I hit play, it'll start playing that sequence. Now, if you're not going to use the sequencer, you can turn the play stop button off and trigger drum sounds from your keyboard. So I'm going to switch back over to the drums mixer tab so you can see. So you can see as I play the keys here, I'm actually triggering the drums right from the keyboard. Now over here on the right, you have two options for key mapping. The chromatic, in which case it starts on C and just goes chromatically across the notes, or here's the general MIDI key mapping, which follows a general MIDI mapping template. So here's that map, just so you know exactly where everything is. So here I'll just record myself playing something by hand, and you can see it's drawing the MIDI out, and then when I play it back, it's actually triggering those notes on the screen. Now, I was in general MIDI. If I go to hit chromatic, it's playing a different map. So it's playing those same MIDI notes. Just be aware of where the MIDI mapping was set when you do your actual recording of your MIDI. So you have the ability to play it just as a regular instrument, or you can use the sequencer. But the play stop button is the key to engaging or disengaging the sequencer. So as I said, there's the drums mixer tab where you can trigger either from your keyboard or right on the screen the drum notes themselves. So you have the note trigger buttons, but right next to it you have the tuning. So I'm just going to play it from the keyboard. And this tuning range is slightly more than the original. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility than what you would have in an actual unit. So you can custom tune each one of these drums. These are single velocity drums. In certain cases, like the snare, you'll see it's labeled lowercase snare and uppercase snare. This is true to the original. Lowercase snare is a softer snare hit versus the uppercase snare. Same is true for the bass. And there are soft and loud versions of the closed hat, tambourine, and cabasa as well. Another important thing to point out here is that the hi-hat has 3 permutations. There's the soft closed hat, and the loud closed hat, and then the open hat. And true to the original, those 3 hat sounds share a single voice. So the closed hat will choke off the open hat. This little set screw next to it controls the length of the open hat. And when you bring the set screw to its minimum value, the open hat is actually shorter than the closed hat. So we've exaggerated that minimum value so you can have even tighter hats than the normal closed hats. There's one drum in here that has 2 different options, and this is also true to the original. You could opt to either have the clave sound, or you could install a different EEPROM and get the rim shot sound. So you just simply click on the name itself to switch. When you have the key mapping switched to general MIDI though, both the clave and rim shot are available at the same time at different points in the keyboard. Now up above is the mixing section where you have control over the volume of that particular drum channel. the delay send from that particular channel, reverb send, and the panning. You'll notice that there's conga up and down, tom up and down, snare. There's a single mixing control for both the soft and loud snare, single mixing channel for soft and loud bass. This is true to the original. The hi-hat has a single mixing channel, and so on. Let's go over the output routing. Now, I mentioned this before, but it's important to select the multi-output version if you want to use the routing to send each drum to its own individual output. So we're in Logic here, and the first thing you want to do is set up your buses in the DAW. Now in Logic, the way to do that is within the mixing panel here, just hit this plus sign, and that will open up these individual buses within the instrument. Now the method for setting up multi-output virtual instruments is different for each DAW, so you'll have to research the process for whatever DAW you're using, but I'm just going to show you in Logic. So I'm just going to quickly change the default names here so that they correspond to the bus numbers. So to understand how this works, let's first talk about the signal flow itself. I'm going to use the conga up drum as an example here. I'm just going to option click each of these parameters to bring them to its normal value. So to trigger the conga up, we can use the keyboard, we can use the sequencer, or we can just use the mouse click right here. Once the signal is generated, it goes to its corresponding channel strip here. So the conga up channel strip, we can turn on drive, compressor, transient master, and or EQ for that particular drum. And so let's just turn the drive on and we'll put it up full blast so you can hear what's happening. So now that distorted conga sound is directed through the channel controls itself. So it's going to go first to the delay send, where it taps off an amount of the signal and sends it through to the delay. The reverb send, which taps off a certain amount and sends it over to the reverb. And then you have your panning and fader control. So our delay is off right now, so we can just pull that down. Let's just use the reverb as an example. So I have a distorted conga that I'm now sending a portion of it from this reverb send over to the reverb. We're using our reverb send to send some of that over to the reverb, and the signal continues on to the panning and to the fader. I should point out that the send is post effects, so the send itself has the drive effect on it. I should also point out that the sends are pre-fader. So even if you pull the fader all the way down, the level of the sends stays the same. Now after the fader, then you go to your output assignment. So right now it's sent to the mix channel, which means the conga up along with every one of these other drums is all going to the mix channel. So the mix channel itself has its own channel strip where you can turn on drive, compressor, transient, EQ. It's basically a master bus effect strip. After the channel strip in the mix channel, it goes to its own delay and reverb sends, panning, and fader to trim the signal. You can think of these sends as being like global sends for the entire mix. So if I want to put reverb or delay on the entire mix, I can just send them right from here. But let's just go back a step. If I were to take this conga up and reassign the output to channel 2, for example, now you can see that it's showing up in bus 2. Now it still has a reverb send going on. If we take a look at the reverb, the delay and reverb each have their own output assignments as well. So when it's set to main, it goes directly to the instrument track. It doesn't go to the mix bus, it goes to the instrument itself. But you can change it to an alternative output as well. So let's just, for example, send it to the 14th bus. So now when I click the conga, now we see the dry conga, I'm going to solo it out here, going to channel 2. And we see the reverb going to bus 14. So the reverb only is going over here. And the same is true for delay. Like if I were to put the delay to bus 13, let's just turn up the send directly from the conga up channel. To turn on the delay first. So here you can see the dry conga here on 2, the reverb on 14, and the delay, I'll just solo it out, on 13. So let me just go ahead and assign these sequentially. And I've just put the delay and reverb back to the main outputs. So let me turn on a sequence and let's watch what happens. So we have the individual drums popping up here on these buses, and then we have the effects coming up on the main output. So one of the things I want to point out here is that now that we have diverted each one of these channels to its own channel in the DAW, they're no longer making their way over to the mix bus. So these mix bus controls here and the mix bus channel strip are no longer active. So I can pull this fader up and down. I can change the sends. And I can even change the effects strip. And nothing happens because there's nothing being fed into this mix bus. It's all going directly from these channels straight into the DAW. So it's just something to bear in mind that if you reroute any of this, and say, for example, you have a global reverb send coming from the mix bus, that won't be active anymore if you've redirected these channels directly into the DAW. Okay, so we just touched on these channel strips a little bit in the last section on routing and signal flow, but I want to go through these effects a little more specifically so you understand all the parameters. So each one of these drums has its own corresponding channel strip, and you can just select them by clicking on the title up above. So not only does each drum have its own channel strip, but the mix bus, as I've described before, also has its own. So anything being routed to the mix bus will be subject to this channel strip, which we talked about in the last section. So we're going to talk about the delay and reverb, the send effects, in the next section. So I'm just going to turn these off for now, so we're only looking at the channel strips. So let me use the snare drum as an example. So in this particular preset, we have the drive on. I'm just going to turn it off so we can hear what it sounds like with nothing on it. So let's first talk about the drive. I'll just turn the drive on. I'm going to crank it all the way up so you can hear what it sounds like. So this is modeled from one of Steve's classic British preamps that he's used for his whole career. But what's special about what we have here is we've also included these little set screws, this high and low pass set screw. So what this does is it actually excludes part of the signal from the drive effect. So if I push up the high pass, everything above that frequency is subject to the drive. Everything below it is excluded. And conversely, the low pass, as I draw this down, everything below that frequency is subject to the drive effect. Everything above it just comes through cleanly. So the end result is that if you want to get rid of some of that explosive low end, you can pull the high pass up and it'll clean up the low end, but you still get that high frequency sizzle. And conversely, if you want to keep the explosive low end, but get rid of some of the brightness up top, you can pull it down using the low pass set screw. So actually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the mix bus because it's more full spectrum. You're going to be able to hear more clearly what is going on with the set screw. So what it means is I have to reroute all of these back to the mix bus. And as per our discussion in the previous section, that just means that all of these drums are going directly into this mix bus before going into the DAW. So it means this mix bus channel strip is now active. So let's just hear what it sounds like with no effects on it. I'm going to turn on the drive effect. I'm going to crank it pretty far up. Now I'm going to pull out some of that low end. So it keeps the distortion sound, but it gets rid of that low end and gives it that sort of clarity. If I go the opposite direction and I pull down the high stuff, this is what it sounds like. So it keeps the low end explosive and woolly sounding, but it gets rid of some of the crunch up top, which is a totally different kind of effect. And you can dial these in at the same time to sort of focus where you want that distortion to live. Okay, so the next thing is the compressor limiter. And for this, I'm just going to use the snare again. So let's hear the snare without anything on it. Now, if I turn the compressor on, by default, the threshold is set to 0. So you're going to want to pull this down a ways so it takes effect. You can start to see the needle move. You have control over the attack, a fast attack or a slow attack, fast or slow release. You have a makeup gain here, so you can conveniently adjust the level without using the actual fader here. And there's also a knee, so you can have a soft or hard knee. And here's your ratio control as well. And finally, there's a slam switch, which pushes it way over the top. Next, we have the transient control. The transient is the first few milliseconds. And the result is if you push up the transient, you'll get a much harder sound. If you pull down the transient, it quiets the onset of the note and the body comparatively is louder. So it gives it a sort of softer sound. So here's with the transient pushed up. So let's compare. Here's the snare with the transient pushed up. Here's with the transient pulled down for a softer result. And then the hold amount just sets how long of a transient control you want. So a longer hold makes for a more dramatic result. And then finally the EQ, I'm going to go back to the mix channel for this. This is an emulation of Steve's classic 4-band British style EQ. This is modeled again after one of his classic pieces of gear. So you have a high and low pass filter here. The inner ring is the low pass. If you just grab it and drag it to the particular frequencies, it pulls down the low pass. And then the outer ring is the high pass, which steps up through these frequencies. Then you have a low shelf. So the way this works is the outer ring sets the frequency and the inner ring pushes up the shelf or pulls it down. 6 o'clock is 0. So plus, minus. Next we have the node, same thing. You can select the frequency with the outer ring and use the inner knob to push it up or pull it down. And then there's a high Q button, which narrows the range of the band. And then finally, we have our high shelf, which works the same way. The outer ring sets the frequency, and the inner gray ring pushes the shelf up or down. And the final set of controls in the mixing section is the delay reverb. So these are your send, reverb, and delay controls right here, where you're sending them from the individual channels and or from the mix bus itself. So for each, there's a global power switch that you can just turn them on or off. As I pointed out earlier, you can bus these anywhere you want. You can send them straight to the main instrument track in your DAW or to their own individual outputs. This is a global return level right here for each of these. So if you're just feeling like you want to push the reverb up overall, you can just goose it right there. Or if it's too much, you can pull it down. So as an example, let me just push up some delay from the snare channel specifically. Okay, I'm going to turn the reverb off for a second. So we're just listening to the snare with the delay. Okay, so the first control I'll talk about is the feedback. So the feedback controls how many repeats there are. So if I want to make that longer, I can do this. Just continues on. If you really want just like a sort of flam, like a slap back, you can go with just a low value on that. But we're going to extend it out so you can really hear it. So stereo just means that both the repeats are repeating in both ears. If I hit ping pong, it goes left and right. So we'll go back to stereo on that. The ratio controls the stereo field. It'll delay it between the ears a bit so you get this sort of stereo effect. Again, you can alt-click it to bring it back to its default. And the damping. So the damping is basically a low-pass filter. When it's set to 20, that's 20 kilohertz. It's pretty much wide open. As you draw it down, each of the repeats gets successively darker. Now on the left here, you have control over the speed of the delay. So right now we have it synced to our DAW. So depending on the BPM of your track, this is an eighth note. You can speed it up to be dotted 16th, triplet eighth notes, 1/16th notes. And then we could just keep on going all the way up to triplet 64th notes. And if you increase the feedback, you can really hear. You can really let it spin out of control, which is kind of fun. So it ranges from whole notes all the way to triplet 64th notes. So let's bring it back to eighth notes. We can switch it from being synced to your DAW, to your track, to just a specific millisecond. So when we switch to seconds, here it's set to 1 second, but we can draw that down granularly down to immediate. So let's turn off the delay for a second and we'll go over to the reverb. Same as the delay unit, there's a power button here and there's a global control over the level. You can just boost the overall amount of reverb or trim it if you want globally. And same as the delay, you can send it to its own unique channel. Now this is based off of Steve's favorite reverb unit from the 1980s, a digital reverb unit. It ranges from organic sounding to inorganic sounding. There are 9 different programs. I'll just show you here. You can change the program and go up and down here. I won't go through the sounds of each one, but let's just take a listen to what this sounds like. Okay, so first of all, here's your decay amount. There are fixed settings, so it ranges from 0.2 seconds, a half a second, 3/4 of a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, maximum. So let's just use the maximum setting so we can hear what that sounds like. There's a dampening feature, same as the delay. By default, it's at 20 kilohertz. It's a low pass filter essentially, so it's wide open. As I draw that down, the reverb will become darker sounding. And there's also a built-in pre-delay. So as you hit the note, it'll delay it before the reverb kicks on. And that ranges from 0 up to 200 milliseconds, which is pretty exaggerated. So here's immediate. A good kind of rule of thumb is in the 50, 60 milliseconds range. There's just a little hesitation. It gives the snare a kind of immediacy without being swarmed with reverb. And if you really want to exaggerate, you can go way out. Now finally, let's talk about the sequencer itself. So when we tab over to the sequencer, you're going to see this set of patterns. As I said in the beginning, the play stop button essentially links or decouples you from your DAW. So when it's off and you hit play in your DAW, the sequencer's going, but it's not triggering any sounds. Whereas if you turn on the play stop button, there you have it. So let's go through the presets first. You'll notice there are 2 banks here. There's the mix preset bank of presets and the pattern presets. So the mix preset encompasses all of your tuning choices, your mixing choices up here in the mixing panel, and all of your channel strips, as well as your delay and reverb settings. Your pattern preset controls these settings here, not the play stop button, but the shuffle, step, and pattern configurations. So when this button is locked, you can use these toggle buttons to go through all the presets. So they're linked. The pattern is linked to the mixing choices as well, the mixing and tuning choices. So as they're locked here, let's just flip through. Now I can go to preset 2. They move in sync. That's the I'll Tumble For You preset. And so on. So as I keep flipping through here, they're moving together. You'll notice though that the pattern preset is independent. So if I use these toggles, we can keep the same tuning and mixing settings, but change the pattern. So for example, let's go to preset 9. This is 1999. So I can leave the mixing presets, meaning all the tuning and levels and channel strip choices and delay and reverb exactly as they are, but then change the pattern. So the pattern changes are independent from the mix presets. But the reason we have this lock button is so that when you use these toggles, they move in concert. So you can preview all the presets that Steve has built. Now, if I unlock that, these just move completely separately. I can change patterns here, and then over here, you'll notice as I change the mixing presets, all of the mixing choices move around. So they're completely independent. So really, you can think of this lock button as a way of flipping through and previewing all of the presets as one, pattern and mixing choices together. Let's just go back to preset 1, and I'm going to show you all the other features within this pattern preset and show you how you can implement this with your songs. So this step section here determines what note value these 16 steps have. So right now there are 16 steps in this sequencer, and it's set to 16th notes. So what that means is those 16 steps as they play through, they represent one bar. Now if I change that to 8th, essentially that means that each one of these steps is an 8th note rather than a 16th note. So it plays through once, it's cut time. It's basically 2 bars. So you can change that to 8th triplet, 16th triplet, 32nd notes, 32nd triplet note, and then of course high, which is 64th. Not super usable, but depending on how you have your tempo set in your song, you can use it in different ways. So by default though, we're going to make each of the 16 steps a 16th note. So every time through, it's 1 bar. The next control is the shuffle control. Now in Steve's long form interview, which is well worth watching, he talks about the shuffle control and how that creates this kind of organic, moving, human-like feel to this particular drum machine. So by default though, we've left these at 50%, which means it's right on the grid, okay? We left it that way for all the presets because we want you to just have it locked into your grid on your song. But this is fun to play with. If you push this to 66%, what it means is that every other note is shuffled to lag behind. And 66% is like creating a dotted version of whatever note that is. So dotted 16th notes in this case. So it has that kind of swung feel. So what's kind of cool though, is you can make it even lazier than a purely swung feel. So it drags a little bit more. Or you can go here, and whereas 50% is right on the grid, you can push it to just slightly off of that. It gives it just a little bit of humanness. So it's worth watching Steve talk about that and how he used that with Culture Club to get this very organic feel. But that's one of the magical pieces of this unit and this software. So let's just bring it back to 50%, just so we're right on the grid. Now these buttons here on the right are going to be crucial to how you create your own patterns in your song, okay? So let's say you want to make your own pattern entirely. Okay, you can start with one of the patterns that's here and start altering it by turning on and off different steps, right? Or you can hit the clear button, the X button, and start with a completely blank canvas and then create your own patterns however you want, just by clicking the LEDs on and off, okay? There's a revert button down below, so if you hit the R button, it brings it back to the preset. There's also a copy paste function here. So there's copy, paste, clear, and revert or reset. Now here's how you can use this in your song. Let's say in pattern bank 1, which is really a user bank, we like pattern 1 that's in there by default. Okay, so we can copy that. Let's move to pattern bank number 2. Now there's a default pattern already in there, but we can just go ahead and paste over the top of that. So it's the same thing, but we can create an alternative ending. Okay, so watch this. Let's start here. And now we've got our alternative saved in preset bank 2. So I'm going to play through, and as it's playing, I'm going to switch. And then let's say in bank 3, I can just paste it again and make a different alternative. So instead of having 4 cowbells at the end, let's do 4 claps. So I can go like this. Sorry, I just went too far back there, but you see what you can do by copying, pasting, and adjusting. You can create any number of permutations. But the way to control that, though, is by using automation. So let's go into the drum machine parameters that you can automate. Okay, so here are all the different things you can automate. You can do the volume of the cabasa, so on and so forth. But the key one you're going to want to use if you're using the sequencer is the pattern preset. Okay, so let's just do this really quickly. One thing to note, okay, is that when we're in pattern 1, the value over here is 0. Okay, so just be aware, it depends on the DAW. Sorry, I'm just doing this very quickly and crudely. So it's in pattern 1, which is a value of 0. Okay, and after it gets passed into the beginning of bar 2, it's pretty much the same pattern, so we don't have to be exact about when we switch it, but we're moving it to a value above 1, which will bring us to pattern 2. Okay, so then when we get to 3, we can go like this. We can just add another one. As long as you're with, above 1, it's going to bring it to pattern 2. And if you're above 2, it's going to bring it to pattern 3. So basically, I'm just very crudely drawing this in just to do this quickly. Bar 1 is going to be pattern 1. Bar 2 is going to be pattern 2. Bar 3 is going to be pattern 3. So there you can see how you can create these kind of alternative bars. So you're not stuck with just playing one bar in a loop this way. You can use the copy, paste, clear, and revert buttons here to customize your own patterns in your own banks and use the automation from your track to control that. Now the mix preset is not automatable because it's just too many parameters to change, and typically you're not going to be changing your mix choices throughout. You're not going to be changing the tuning globally or the reverb or all the EQs globally. That's not what you're going to be doing in your own track. You may, though, want to take, for example, the reverb level, just as a hypothetical. Let's say you get to your chorus and you want to boost the reverb to really give it something. Let's go take we'll go find the reverb wet dry level, okay? And let's say in bar 4, it's here at -9 dB. We want to goose it to, I don't know, way up there. So watch this. When we're in bar 3, here you're going to see this reverb level. Let's just say in bar 4, we're getting to the chorus of the song, right? So you saw the reverb level go up. You can do this with anything you want. You can make the hand clap reverb send, boost, or turn on the delay, or change the dampening from dark to bright. Any of those parameters, they're all available there for you to customize. So thank you for watching the tutorial video for the Levine's Machines drum machine by Iconic Instruments. Please email us with any questions you have, and thanks for checking out Iconic Instruments.